It was still dark when Charlotte Hayes opened her eyes, though her bedroom was flooded with an anxious glow, the pale light of dawn squeezing reluctantly through thick curtains, illuminating the silk of her wedding dress hanging like a ghost at the edge of the room. Her heart was pounding, a deep, trembling thump that reverberated all the way to her fingertips. She lay motionless in bed, staring at the white lace garment that was meant to be a symbol of joy, of union, of a new beginning. But to her, it felt like a cage. In the cold silence of that room, Charlotte realized with soul-crushing clarity that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. She was 26, pale-skinned, delicate features framed by long ash-blonde hair cascading down in soft waves, light gray eyes that always seemed to hold back more emotion than she allowed herself to express. People always said she looked like a perfect painting, poised, elegant, composed. But this morning, looking at her reflection in the mirror, she saw cracks in that painting. She saw fear. She saw someone who had spent her life being what others wanted her to be. The daughter of a traditional Boston family. The quiet, well-behaved woman. The obedient fiancé. Not once had anyone asked her what she wanted. As she sat up, the floorboards cold beneath her bare feet, whispers of yesterday's chaos echoed in her mind. Her mother brushing her hair, telling her she would look perfect, her father clapping her fiancé on the shoulder, sealing their family's business alliance, her relatives congratulating her, as if she were a transaction finally completed. And every time someone said, "You're a lucky girl," her chest tightened until it felt impossible to breathe. She stood slowly, walked to the window, and pulled open the curtains. A stream of harsh morning light flooded in. A new day. Her wedding day. Somewhere across town, another woman was watching the sunrise, but for entirely different reasons. Emma Blackwood stood barefoot on the balcony of her penthouse apartment, her arms crossed over the sleek satin robe that draped her tall, elegant figure. She was 30, strikingly beautiful, with deep chestnut brown hair falling smoothly over her shoulders, a sharp jawline softened only by the warmth in her hazel eyes that had seen too much for her age, eyes that guarded carefully built walls around a heart that had once been open and trusting. A heart now cautious, calculated, controlled. Yet this morning, something felt different. The city stretched beneath her like a chessboard she was expected to dominate, a world she had built with ambition, sleepless nights, flawless business deals, and a respect that bordered on fear. She was the heir to Blackwood Estate Holdings, an empire of glass towers, luxury developments, private islands. They called her the Ice Queen of real estate, but what people didn't know was that ice is fragile. It cracks under pressure. And Emma could feel her cracks spreading. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, cold and sharp. Marry by the end of the year, or lose everything you've built. Emma exhaled slowly, watching her breath ghost in the morning chill. Marriage. To someone she didn't love. To maintain a facade of normality. To please her conservative family. To erase her truth. Her truth that she loved differently. Her truth that she had learned to hide because loving women was a liability in the world she came from. She took a sip of her coffee. Just like every morning. Except, today, she felt something stirring. As if the universe was holding its breath. Back at the church, time was dissolving. Charlotte stood in front of the mirror, wearing the white gown. The room was filled with bridesmaids and her mother fussing over her, adjusting her veil, her lace sleeves, her flawless makeup. Everyone kept telling her, "You look beautiful." But her heartbeat had turned into a desperate drum. And then, without planning it, without thinking, her body simply moved. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't make a speech. She didn't cry. She just turned away from the mirror, lifted the layers of tulle and lace, stepped quietly to the sacristy window, opened it and climbed out. The cold morning air slapped her face. Her heels sank into the damp grass. And then she ran. Through yards, across parking lots, down the old cobblestone streets of Boston's historic district, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a ghostly banner. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what would happen next. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, she was choosing herself. Cars honked. People stared. Someone shouted, "Runaway bride." But Charlotte didn't stop. She didn't even look back. After half an hour of running, her body aching, her shoes soaked, her hair messily falling from its pinned curls, she reached a quiet, tree-lined street and finally stopped. The world was silent, except for her breathing. And then, through the silence, a voice. "Are you okay?" She froze. A sleek black car had slowed beside her. The window rolled down. Inside sat a woman with hair as dark as espresso, eyes sharp and warm at the same time, an expression caught somewhere between surprise and curiosity. Emma Blackwood. Wearing a beige coat over a thin silk blouse, hair tousled slightly from the wind, lips parted slightly as she took in the extraordinary sight of a woman, in a full wedding gown, standing alone on a quiet street, looking both terrified and alive in a way Emma had never seen. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition? A spark? A whisper of connection the world wasn't ready to explain? Emma felt something inside her chest, something restless, something like realization. Charlotte swallowed hard, breathless and shaking, but managed a strained laugh. I don't know where I'm going." Emma's gaze softened. "Then let me take you somewhere. Anywhere. Away from whatever you're running from." Charlotte hesitated, but everything in her told her she could trust this woman, this stranger. So she nodded. Emma unlocked the door. Charlotte got in. Two lives shifting course. Neither of them aware that fate had just drawn its opening line. In that black car, as Boston blurred past, Charlotte stared out the window, her reflection staring back in torn lace and trembling eyes. Emma watched her, intrigued by the vulnerability, the strength, the contradiction of a woman who had just chosen to walk away from an entire life, simply because it wasn't hers. "What's your name?" Emma asked softly. Charlotte turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "Charlotte Hayes." Emma nodded. "Emma," she said simply. And in that moment, in the quiet hum of the city outside and the echo of their names inside, something settled between them. Not certainty, not understanding, but possibility. And possibility changes everything. Deep inside, they both knew their lives had just split into two timelines, the one that was expected of them and the one waiting quietly, daring them to choose it. Neither knew what the next chapters would hold. Only that this moment was the beginning. Charlotte had never felt silence like this before. Not empty, not cold, but heavy with 100 things neither of them knew how to say. As the car turned into an underground driveway beneath a shimmering glass tower in Boston's waterfront district, she stared at the sleek modern facade rising into the sky, elegant and intimidating at once, like the woman driving the car. Emma parked in a private underground space, typed a passcode into a glowing panel, and led Charlotte toward a private elevator, her demeanor calm, yet unusually quiet. Charlotte followed, feeling both nervous and strangely safe, her long ash-blonde hair disheveled from running, lace torn at her sleeve, cheeks still flushed. She must have looked like a dream and a disaster all at once. Emma glanced at her briefly, unable to look away for too long. There was something magnetic about her, a softness that contradicted the chaos she had just run away from. Her skin, pale and luminous, contrasted with her light gray eyes that held questions and pain, and something else Emma couldn't quite name. Emma herself stood in elegant contrast, tall and poised, her deep chestnut brown hair sleek and controlled, her hazel eyes reflecting curiosity and something dangerously close to admiration, though she masked it behind a measured calm. The elevator doors closed. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Emma broke the silence in a quiet voice. "Does anyone know you left?" Charlotte shook her head slowly. "No. They probably noticed by now. But I didn't tell anyone. I just ran." Emma nodded, her expression unreadable, though her hands tightened slightly around the keys she held. "I know what it feels like," she said, "to leave something that was never yours." The doors opened with a soft chime. Charlotte stepped out, expecting a hallway. Instead, she found herself in a breathtaking penthouse, glass walls revealing the Boston skyline and the glimmering harbor below, morning sunlight spilling across dark wood floors and marble counters. Everything was clean, minimalist, controlled. Just like Emma. But it didn't feel cold. It felt lonely. Charlotte stepped further in, still clutching her wedding dress nervously, feeling like an intruder in someone else's perfect world. Emma watched her take it in. She didn't usually let people in, not employees, not family, not even friends. But she hadn't hesitated to bring Charlotte here.
Why?
She didn't know. Emma gestured gently. There's a guest room down the hall. You can shower, change, rest. I'll get you something to wear. Charlotte nodded silently, but suddenly, her voice trembled. Why are you helping me? Emma paused. The question hung between them. Then she spoke quietly, but with a fragility Charlotte hadn't expected. Because you ran, Emma said simply. You chose yourself. Most people don't. It struck Charlotte deeply. She looked at Emma differently now, not as a stranger, not as a rescuer, but as someone who understood. Someone who also lived with expectations she never chose. Emma left her with clean clothes, soft loungewear that smelled faintly of vanilla and cedar, and told her to take her time. Charlotte stepped into the bathroom, closed the door, and leaned against it, letting out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She looked in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. Lace torn at the hem, mascara smudged, veil twisted. A runaway bride. But beneath that, someone new. Someone awake. She began to peel away the wedding dress, layer by layer, like shedding a life that was never truly hers. When she stepped into the steaming shower, she felt as though pieces of fear, shame, expectation washed away, leaving only raw humanity, vulnerability, and, strangely, hope. Meanwhile, Emma paced in the living room, conflicted. She didn't bring strangers home. She didn't impulsively help people. She didn't break her rules. She had always lived with walls, built tall and impenetrable, protecting her from rejection, from judgment, from being seen. But when she saw Charlotte on that street, something cracked. And now, she didn't know how to put it back together. Charlotte emerged after some time, hair damp, now falling freely down her back, wearing Emma's clothes, an oversized cream sweater and soft gray pants. She looked different, not just physically, but lighter, calmer, and yet more present. Emma looked up. Something fluttered in her chest. She had seen beautiful women before. She had dated women before. But this was different. It wasn't attraction based on desire. It was something deeper. Intrigue. Recognition. The air between them crackled with something that neither dared name. Charlotte hesitated before stepping into the living room. Thank you for all of this, she said softly. Emma nodded, trying to stay composed. You're safe here, she answered, and she meant it. They sat across from each other at the long marble kitchen counter, steaming mugs of coffee between them. Emma watched Charlotte cradle the mug between her hands, closing her eyes briefly as if savoring warmth she hadn't felt in months.
Years, maybe.
Emma spoke first, carefully. Do you regret it? Running. Charlotte stared into the mug. I regret waiting so long, she said quietly. That made Emma pause. It echoed in her mind, louder than it should have. She studied Charlotte carefully, as though she were a puzzle. Who were you supposed to marry? She asked gently. Charlotte inhaled sharply. A man I barely know. My parents arranged it. Business. Status. They kept telling me I was lucky. Emma's gaze softened. Were you? Charlotte looked up. Her gray eyes glistened. I was trapped, she whispered. Emma felt that like a punch to the chest. She didn't respond, not verbally. But something in her gaze said, I understand. I know trapped. They sat in silence again, but this silence felt different. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments, on a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. It wasn't awkward, it was honest. Finally, Charlotte asked, what about you? Why did you stop that day? Why did you help me? Emma held her gaze, something flickering in those hazel eyes. Because, Emma said softly, I know what it feels like to stand in a life everyone expects you to live, except you. Charlotte's breath hitched. Emma hadn't admitted that to anyone, not even to herself, in a way. Charlotte spoke again, almost cautiously. Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you chose for yourself? Emma didn't look away this time. She met Charlotte's gaze directly. Every day, she said. Something shifted between them. Something quiet but powerful. A pulse of connection. Of understanding. Of possibility. And then it happened silently. Charlotte reached across the counter. Not quite touching, but close. Emma didn't pull away. She didn't look away either. She simply stayed. Present. Vulnerable. Unmasked. Later, Emma walked to the window. Charlotte joined her. The city shimmered below, alive and unaware of the moment unfolding inside this apartment. Emma spoke, her voice softer than before. They want me to marry, she said.
To prove something.
To hide something. To be someone I'm not. Charlotte turned, her expression gentle. And will you? Emma looked at her, long and searching. And for once, she didn't think. She didn't calculate. She didn't speak in strategy. She spoke in truth. Not unless I choose it. Charlotte felt something inside her shift. She looked at Emma. Just looked. And Emma saw it. Saw the realization. The desire, not romantic, not yet, but something deeply human. A desire to choose. To feel. To live. Emma exhaled slowly. Then quietly, carefully, deliberately, she spoke the words that would change everything. What if, she said, we could help each other? Charlotte blinked in surprise, heart pounding. Emma continued, you ran from a life that wasn't yours. I've been living one that isn't mine. What if we made a different one? Together. There would be rules. It wouldn't need to be real. But it could protect us both. She paused. Then, softer than a heartbeat, she said it. What if you didn't have to go back? Charlotte's breath caught in her chest. She looked at Emma, not the billionaire, not the stranger, but the woman offering her a choice no one had ever given her before. A choice to stay. A choice to live. A choice to become someone real. Not for others, but for herself. A million thoughts rushed through Charlotte's mind. Fear, uncertainty, guilt. But louder than all of them was a quiet, daring thought. Maybe this is the beginning of my real life. Emma watched her, waiting, not pressuring, not manipulating, just waiting. Charlotte finally spoke, voice trembling, but steady. What would it look like? Emma didn't smile, but her eyes did. That's for us to decide. And just like that, the game changed. Not a rescue, not a transaction, not yet love, but a beginning. Charlotte didn't know if the silence that followed Emma's proposal was seconds or minutes or hours, only that the weight of it felt like a shift in gravity itself, as if the world outside Emma's glass windows had rearranged itself, waiting for her to speak. Emma stood still, her posture elegant yet unusually fragile, her hazel eyes calm but not guarded, almost as though she were offering not a deal, but a choice, and underneath that choice, something deeper. A glimpse into the life she longed for but never allowed herself to reach. Charlotte felt the echo of that longing. It lived inside her too. In all the years she had smiled politely, hidden her truth, obeyed without questioning. Her ash-blonde hair, now slightly dried, fell softly against her pale sweater, her light gray eyes locked onto Emma with both uncertainty and something new, something like awareness. You mean, Charlotte whispered slowly, you're asking me to pretend to be your wife? Emma didn't blink. For a year. A year, Charlotte repeated, almost breathless. Emma nodded, voice calm, controlled, but quieter now, as if this part cost her strength. It would not just save me. It would save what I built. My grandmother can threaten my position, my inheritance, even my reputation, but she can't take away a marriage. A legal marriage. And if I am married, she can't control the narrative anymore. Charlotte stared at her. She wasn't delusional. She knew who Emma Blackwood was. Billionaire.
Heiress.
A woman whose name lived in newspapers, magazines, celebrity gossip lists. But sitting here, In this penthouse bathed in early afternoon light, Charlotte didn't see the headlines, the tailored elegance, the reputation. She saw someone tired, someone lonely, someone done pretending, someone shockingly similar to herself. "I need someone who is not afraid to stand next to me," Emma continued. "Someone who isn't afraid to be seen, because she finally knows who she is." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat, because she felt like Emma wasn't just describing what she needed, she was describing Charlotte too. Then Emma's tone changed, more businesslike, protective again. "But Charlotte, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't want to feel. It would be an agreement. 2 signatures. A role. A contract. A fresh start." But Charlotte heard the hesitation, the unspoken truth. Emma didn't fully believe her own words, because she already felt something too.
Charlotte didn't know what to say.
She had never imagined her life like this. Not once. She had imagined quiet cottages, bookstores, traveling alone, maybe someday finding someone, but never a penthouse. Never a woman like Emma. Never a proposal like this. "I don't know who I am," Charlotte whispered, almost afraid of her own words. "I've never chosen anything real. I don't know who I'd be if I said yes." Emma looked at her gently, and something in her softened. "Maybe that's exactly why you should say yes," Emma said. "Maybe this isn't about pretending. Maybe it's about beginning." The words lingered in the air like a spark that neither dared extinguish. And suddenly Charlotte realized this was not a strange, insane proposition. Or maybe it was, but it was also the first time someone wasn't telling her who to be. They were asking her to choose. She took a breath. Her heart raced. Then she said, voice trembling but certain, "Tell me the rules." Emma blinked, not expecting that. Her heartbeat, usually steady, controlled, skipped. She walked slowly to the long marble counter, picked up a leather notebook, then returned to the love seat across from Charlotte. She sat, back straight but shoulders just slightly tense, and opened the notebook to a blank page. "Rule 1, she said. "We are legally married for 1 year." Charlotte nodded, listening, heart pounding. "Rule 2, Emma continued. "We present ourselves publicly as a married couple. Events, interviews, my life is always under cameras. People will notice you." Charlotte felt her stomach flip. She was used to being unseen, unknown.
Now she would be watched.
"Rule 3, Emma's voice softened. "Inside this apartment, outside articles and cameras and boardrooms, we don't have to perform." Charlotte looked at her carefully. "But we do have to live together?" Emma hesitated. "Yes." "In the same apartment?" "Yes." "In the same bedroom?" Emma's breath caught. A flicker in her amber eyes. Something unguarded, vulnerable. "At first, no. 2 rooms. This is not a performance inside these walls." Charlotte nodded, absorbing it all. But Emma wasn't finished. "Rule 4, she said more quietly, "this arrangement is not built to break us. If either of us ever feels unsafe, pressured, or emotionally compromised, we talk before it does damage." Charlotte looked at her, eyes wide. "You've thought about this a lot," she said softly. "Too much," Emma admitted. "Maybe my whole life." Silence fell again. Not confusion, contemplation. Charlotte finally whispered, "And Rule 5. Emma hesitated. Then she closed the notebook and looked directly at Charlotte. "Rule 5, she said, voice low, almost fragile. "We don't fall in love." The words cut through the air like a challenge neither could pretend to believe. Charlotte froze. Emma stayed still. Too still. Their eyes locked. And for one terrifying, electrifying moment, they both knew. Rule number 5 was already broken. But neither spoke it aloud. Not yet. Hours passed after that conversation. Charlotte walked through the luxurious penthouse, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the quiet hum of the city far below, the way afternoon sunlight painted golden patches across glass and steel. Emma watched her roam, her eyes softening in ways she didn't allow herself to reveal. At one point, Charlotte stood near the window, arms folded around herself, gaze lost in the Boston skyline. Emma approached quietly, not too close. "You don't have to decide tonight," Emma said softly. Charlotte kept looking outside. Then, without turning, she whispered, I already have. Emma's breath caught. Charlotte turned to face her fully. Her light gray eyes were no longer clouded with fear. They were clear now, focused, steady. I will do it, she said. But not because I need saving. Emma didn't say anything. She waited. Charlotte stepped closer. I will do it because for the first time in my life, someone is asking me to choose. A silence. Emma exhaled, something unspoken flashing in her eyes. Respect. Something deeper. Then, Charlotte extended her hand, not toward the contract, not toward paperwork, but toward Emma. Just her hand.
A choice. Emma looked at it, stunned.
No one had ever offered her something without wanting something else in return. Slowly, so slowly, Emma lifted her hand and placed it in Charlotte's. No signatures. No witnesses. Just a silent beginning. And for the first time in years, Emma Blackwood did something she had forgotten how to do. She smiled. Not a perfect smile. Not a public smile. But a real one. Charlotte felt it. Felt the shift inside herself too. And somewhere far away, in a wedding venue hastily searching for a vanished bride, someone realized Charlotte Hayes had changed her story forever. But only Emma Blackwood knew the truth. Charlotte hadn't just left a wedding. She had stepped into a life. That night, they sat in the dimly lit living room, not quite close, but not far apart, drinking tea in mugs that didn't match, listening to rain tapping softly against glass. Not speaking. Not rushing. Just existing. And for people like them who had lived so long performing, existing, truly existing, felt like love. Even if they didn't name it yet. Charlotte never imagined how strange it would feel to step into a life that technically belonged to someone else and yet slowly began to feel like hers. Not quite comfortable, not quite foreign. Like wearing an expensive silk dress that wasn't made for her, but somehow fit her better with every passing hour. And that was exactly how Emma Blackwood's penthouse felt on that first morning of living there officially. A place where everything gleamed with elegant precision, from the marble counters to the glass walls to the exact way the books on the shelves had been arranged. But beneath the perfection, Charlotte felt something else, something she hadn't initially seen. The loneliness of a woman who built an empire but had no one to share her mornings with, no one to greet in the kitchen, no one to tell about dreams or doubts or fears. And that thought made Charlotte pause at the bottom of the stairs, barefoot, dressed in the soft white sweater Emma had lent her, her ash blonde hair falling loosely down her back, her light gray eyes scanning the quiet space as if searching for something unnamed, something that had less to do with the apartment and more to do with the woman inside it. Emma stood by the window already, dressed immaculately in a tailored charcoal suit, hair perfectly straight, chestnut brown with subtle gold undertones in the morning light, hazel eyes focused, a picture of authority and composure. Except this morning, she had hesitated for a brief second before greeting Charlotte, and Charlotte noticed it. Just a flicker, a moment where Emma's controlled expression softened, a moment that told Charlotte, silently, that her presence made the apartment feel less
empty.
They had coffee in silence, not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that existed between two people learning how to share space without performing, learning how to exist alongside one another without masks. And though Emma's posture remained elegant and composed, she seemed quieter today, not in a distant way, but in a thoughtful one, as if she were relearning how to exist where she didn't have to constantly guard her truth. You have a meeting today, Charlotte said quietly, her fingers curled around a ceramic mug. Emma nodded, eyes narrowing slightly in thought. 2, actually. The second one is a gala charity event. It's public. Charlotte hesitated, her heart thudding. Public meaning cameras? People asking questions? Emma nodded. They will want to see you, she said simply. Charlotte felt a rush of nerves, but underneath the nerves, something else. Pride, maybe, or purpose, the feeling of finally being seen, not as someone's daughter or someone's bride, but as someone who could choose who she wanted to stand beside. Emma must have noticed her hesitation because she stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that Charlotte could feel her presence, smell the faint scent of cedar, and something floral that seemed permanently woven into Emma's perfume, and Emma spoke softly. "They will look, yes, but I won't let them devour you. You stand beside me, not behind." Charlotte looked up at her through soft waves of blonde hair and felt her breath catch because in that moment, Emma Blackwood didn't look like the cold billionaire who graced magazine covers. She looked like someone offering protection, not control, and Charlotte didn't feel like a prop. She felt like a partner, even if neither of them fully understood what that meant yet. In the afternoon, a stylist Emma trusted, a woman named Elise with quick hands and sharp eyes, arrived at the penthouse to prepare Charlotte for the evening, and Charlotte stood in front of the mirror, letting Elise work, brushing and sculpting her ash blonde hair into a soft, elegant style that framed her delicate features rather than hiding them, enhancing rather than transforming, and when Elise paused and said, "You don't need to look like someone else," Charlotte knew she meant it, and Emma, passing by, glanced at her reflection and nodded, quietly, approvingly, without a word. Hours later, they descended a set of marble steps into a ballroom sparkling with chandeliers, velvet, glass, and the hush of wealthy whispers, and Charlotte felt a tremor of panic until she felt Emma's hand brush lightly, deliberately, against hers. Not quite holding it, not quite letting go, just enough contact to say, "You're not alone." And that touch, fleeting and electric, felt more grounding than anything Charlotte had known in months, maybe years. Cameras flashed, people turned, and suddenly Charlotte felt every eye in the room notice her, not because she was the runaway bride and not because she was a societal prop, but because she was next to Emma Blackwood, unflinching, graceful, poised, and she was not shrinking, she was choosing to be seen. Emma introduced her to people with a calm, steady voice, her hazel eyes occasionally flickering toward Charlotte not with obligation, but with quiet reassurance, and every time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, something both dangerous and necessary, and Charlotte began to understand what it meant to stand beside someone powerful without losing herself, and more shockingly, what it meant to stand beside someone powerful and feel equal. During the evening, Charlotte slipped away for a moment, overwhelmed by lights, voices, cameras, and she found herself on a quiet balcony lit with strands of warm white light, overlooking the glittering cityscape, and after several minutes, Emma found her there, the door clicking softly shut behind her, and she approached, no longer CEO Emma Blackwood, but something softer, something closer, and stood beside Charlotte. Their reflections mirrored in the glass, standing at the same height, the same stillness, wrapped in the same silence. "You did well," Emma said quietly. Charlotte didn't answer, but she turned, and for the first time, she didn't feel intimidated by Emma's poise. She felt drawn to it, drawn to the quiet vulnerability beneath it, the kind that only showed up when no one else was watching. "It's strange," Charlotte whispered. "People think you're so untouchable, so invulnerable." Emma looked at her, hazel eyes softer in the warm light. "I know." Charlotte's voice was almost a breath. "But you're not." Emma's breath caught, just slightly, the way it had earlier when Charlotte crossed some invisible line between what was safe and what was true, and Emma didn't deny it, didn't hide it. She simply stayed silent, allowing herself to be seen because for the first time in months, years, maybe forever, it felt safe to be seen. And then something happened, not dramatic, not cinematic, but deeply, subtly altering. Emma reached for the railing, and when her hand brushed Charlotte's, neither of them pulled away, but neither of them fully held, and in that space between almost touching and not touching, something deeper than physical contact existed, the kind of closeness that was not defined by rules or contracts, but by two truths silently recognizing each other. Later that night, back at the penthouse, Charlotte changed out of the elegant gown and into soft cotton clothes, her long ash blonde hair now loose, skin still glowing faintly from the evening, and she passed Emma in the hallway, who was now barefoot, hair down, no longer the perfect CEO, but a woman who turned off her own lights, poured her own tea, and for a moment, they just looked at one another in the hallway, quiet, vulnerable, unmasked, and Charlotte felt an ache she didn't understand yet. something at the intersection of comfort and longing, and Emma, noticing something in Charlotte's eyes, whispered softly, "You look real tonight." Charlotte felt something warm spread through her, not just from the compliment but from the fact that, for once, someone noticed her realness, not her performance. She met Emma's gaze and whispered back, "So, do you?" They stood there, not closer, not farther, and then Charlotte spoke, almost to herself, "I didn't feel like I was acting tonight." Emma swallowed, her voice impossibly soft. "Neither did I." And that was the moment Charlotte realized the line between pretending and becoming had already begun to blur, not with physical closeness, not yet, but with emotional exposure, and that was far more intimate. That night, neither of them slept easily, not because they were anxious, not because they were afraid, but because for the first time, they both found themselves imagining what their life would look like if this stopped being an arrangement and started being something real. Charlotte didn't quite understand when it began feeling natural, the way their mornings slowly braided into a quiet rhythm that did not belong to chaos, but to something softer, something that felt suspiciously like home, though neither of them dared to speak that word aloud, and maybe that was why it felt even more real, because silence often held truths that words were not brave enough to carry. It happened gradually, the blending of routines, the way Emma would appear in the kitchen at 6:30 every morning, dressed in tailored suits, chestnut brown hair perfectly smoothed behind her shoulders, hazel eyes still sleepy even though her posture remained poised, while Charlotte, in soft cotton sweaters and delicate socks, ash blonde hair loose and still carrying faint traces of dreams, would already be making coffee, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because she had begun to understand how Emma liked it. 2 teaspoons of sugar, not stirred, because she liked to do it herself, a small ritual of control, one of the few things in her life she still fully owned, and every morning, when Charlotte handed it to her, their fingers brushed, not dramatically, not intentionally, but inevitably, and though it lasted only a second, it always lingered longer in their minds. Emma never said anything about it, but sometimes Charlotte noticed her pause, just for a moment, before taking her first sip. They fell into patterns like that. Emma, who had spent years living on schedules, suddenly found herself slowing down in the mornings, staying a few minutes longer than she needed to, occasionally sitting at the kitchen counter instead of heading straight to the elevator. Charlotte began learning the subtle language of Emma's emotions, small things no one else seemed to notice, the way her jaw tightened when her grandmother called, the way her eyes dimmed after meetings with board members who didn't respect her authority, the way her posture stiffened whenever someone mentioned legacy or heirs or husbands, as if the very word husband itself was a chain tightened around her ribcage. And Emma, in return, began learning Charlotte too, the way she looked at the city like she was learning to belong to it, the way she sometimes went quiet for no reason, eyes distant, fingers twisted in the sleeves of her sweater, as if remembering something heavy, something she had never spoken aloud, and Emma noticed that whenever Charlotte felt that way, she would sit by the window, barefoot, knees pulled to her chest, and stay there for long stretches of time in silence. And Emma didn't know why she noticed that, or why she began postponing meetings just so she could come back and find Charlotte still there, breathing softly, existing softly, something peaceful simply by being. One evening, after a particularly brutal meeting with the Blackwood Holdings board, where old men in expensive suits spoke over Emma repeatedly, questioning her leadership, ignoring her data, undermining her authority in ways that felt rehearsed and malicious, Emma returned to the penthouse with tight shoulders and a thinner voice than usual. She didn't say anything when she entered, simply set down her bag, unbuttoned her blazer with stiff hands, and walked mechanically toward the kitchen, where she leaned against the counter, eyes locked on some distant point on the marble. Charlotte had been reading in the living room, but stood immediately when she saw her, recognizing something raw in Emma's expression, something not many people ever saw. She approached quietly, not speaking, not crowding, just existing beside her, waiting. After a while, Emma exhaled shakily and said, "Sometimes it feels like the empire I built is the same one that will bury me." Charlotte didn't answer right away. She didn't offer comfort cliches. Instead, she walked past Emma, set water to boil, and returned with 2 cups of tea. One she set near Emma gently. Emma didn't touch it yet. Charlotte spoke softly. Empires were meant to be run with armies. But you built yours alone. Emma didn't say anything, but her eyes flickered, and Charlotte continued. Maybe the problem isn't that you feel buried. Maybe the problem is that you were never meant to carry all of it alone. It was a simple sentence, but something in it made Emma go silent. Not the silence of dismissal, but the silence of recognition. She didn't look at Charlotte, not yet, but her breathing softened. After a moment, Charlotte did something she had never done before. She reached out and, with the gentlest motion, placed her hand over Emma's hand, which rested on the cool marble of the counter. Her hand was warm, delicate, trembling slightly, but steady enough to say, "I'm here." Emma didn't look at her, but she didn't move her hand away. She didn't even flinch. She just stayed there, letting someone see her without armor, without perfection. And that was, in many ways, more intimate than any touch could ever be. The next day, Emma let Charlotte accompany her to a smaller business briefing, not a gala, not a public event, but something more intimate, a luncheon of executives at a high-rise restaurant overlooking the harbor. Charlotte was nervous, unsure of her place, but Emma, before stepping out of the elevator, turned to her, adjusting the collar of Charlotte's blouse with such softness that Charlotte felt something flutter inside her, and Emma said quietly, "You don't have to be anything but yourself." Charlotte didn't know what being herself meant yet, but she knew that Emma, in that moment, believed she could be something more than what she had been told to be her whole life. Inside the restaurant, Charlotte watched how Emma held herself, not just with elegance, but with strategic grace, speaking clearly, not loudly, listening more than she talked, commanding the room without raising her voice, and suddenly Charlotte understood why people both feared and admired her. Because power didn't have to be loud to be undeniable. At one point, a man named Richard, sharply dressed and aggressively confident, leaned too close to Emma, ignoring boundaries, touching her glass instead of his own, lowering his voice as though speaking privately, though clearly intending to intimidate. His tone was pointed, his message clear. He did not respect her. Emma's posture stiffened, but before she could respond, Charlotte stepped in. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with calm strength. She placed a gentle hand on Emma's arm and spoke with quiet firmness. I believe Emma already answered that. The words were soft, but the meaning was sharp. Richard withdrew. Emma looked at Charlotte, not surprised, but affected. She held Charlotte's gaze for a long moment, and in that look, Charlotte could swear Emma was telling her something deeper than gratitude. Later, in the car, Emma was silent for a long time. Charlotte worried she had overstepped. But when Emma finally spoke, her voice was low, almost emotional. It has been a long time, she said slowly, a very long time, since someone stood beside me instead of behind me. Charlotte's throat tightened, because she knew Emma wasn't only talking about business.
She was talking about life, about fear,
about truth. Charlotte's voice was soft, trembling but certain. You're not alone anymore, Emma. It was the first time Charlotte had spoken Emma's name aloud like that, without restraint, without hesitation, just truth. Emma turned, slowly, and looked at her. Not just looked, saw her. There, in the back seat of a quiet car, without cameras or contracts or obligations, something shifted permanently between them, still unspoken, still fragile, still unnamed, but undeniably real. That night, Charlotte found Emma standing by the window again. Not as CEO, not as Blackwood, but as Emma, barefoot, hair loose, mug of tea in her hand, staring out at the skyline not like it was hers to conquer, but like it was something she was finally allowed to simply watch. Charlotte approached, silent, and stood beside her for a long while. Neither spoke. Neither moved away. At one point, Charlotte whispered, "What would your life look like if you weren't afraid to live it?" Emma's eyes glistened in the dim light, and after an achingly long moment, she whispered back, voice barely audible, "Maybe like this." And then it happened. Not dramatic, not loud, but deeply, quietly irreversible. Emma lifted her hand, slowly, carefully, and without looking away, tucked a loose strand of Charlotte's ash-blonde hair gently behind her ear, her fingers grazing Charlotte's cheek for only 1 second. But in that second, Charlotte felt her heart flip, her breath catch, and something settled deep in her chest like a truth she wasn't ready to speak, but could no longer deny. Emma's hand stopped halfway down, almost as if she wanted to pull it away, afraid to cross a line they had drawn themselves, but Charlotte, feeling something she didn't have words for yet, didn't let her. She didn't grab Emma's hand, but she didn't let it fall away either. She simply stayed there, head slightly tilted, breath trembling, allowing the closeness to exist. Emma didn't move either. And that was the moment they both knew. This was no longer pretend. Charlotte had never felt time move the way it began moving inside Emma's penthouse, not in hours or minutes or carefully structured schedules, but in smaller, softer moments, like the way Emma's hazel eyes lingered a little too long when Charlotte laughed at something, or the way Charlotte began waking up early without an alarm just to catch Emma in the kitchen before she put on her mask of perfect, untouchable CEO. Hair sleek and expression controlled, because Charlotte was beginning to realize that she loved seeing Emma before she became Emma Blackwood, when she was just Emma, barefoot, hair slightly tangled, voice softer than any voice she used in meetings, and this gradual shifting of time, from calendar to heartbeat, felt like something Charlotte didn't have a name for yet, and maybe that was why it scared her, because she knew whatever was happening was no longer part of the agreement. One morning, Charlotte entered the kitchen to find Emma already there, standing by the window, wearing a black blazer but still barefoot, coffee untouched in her hand, lost in thought in front of a city that was always watching, always waiting to consume her. Normally, Emma would turn and offer some greeting, quiet but polite, but today she didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, her reflection faint in the glass, looking not powerful, but distant, and Charlotte sensed that something was different, something heavy. "Emma," Charlotte said softly, unsure if she should step closer. Emma didn't turn, but her voice, when it finally came, was low and tight. "They don't think I'm enough," she said, almost a whisper. Charlotte frowned.
Who?
Emma stared at the skyline.
Them.
It could have meant the board, her grandmother, the investors, the world. Or maybe, Charlotte realized, it meant all of them. Emma took a deep breath, finally turned around, and Charlotte immediately noticed the difference. Not just tiredness, but something raw in her hazel eyes, something Charlotte had never seen there before.
Fear.
"They are already preparing alternatives," Emma said quietly. "Marriage isn't just protection for me anymore. It's proof." Charlotte stepped closer, heart pounding. Proof of what? Emma swallowed, her voice breaking almost imperceptibly. "That I am not broken." The words startled Charlotte, not because of their meaning, but because of who spoke them. Emma, who always held power like a weapon, who carried elegance like armor, who had never once admitted weakness. Charlotte felt her chest tighten. Without thinking, she moved closer, standing right in front of Emma, close enough to feel her unsteady breathing, close enough to see that beneath the perfect exterior, there was a woman who had lived too long with pressure that did not allow softness or mistakes or fragility. "You're not broken," Charlotte said quietly, her voice trembling but firm. "You're human." Emma looked at her as if no one had ever said that to her before, not as insult, not as pity, but as truth. And then, slowly, something in Emma's expression cracked, not painfully but softly, like a door opening after years of being locked, and she whispered, "I don't know how to be that."
Charlotte didn't think.
She didn't plan. She simply reached out and took Emma's hand, really took it this time, not brushing it, not accidentally touching it, but holding it fully, deliberately, and Emma didn't pull away, didn't tense, didn't question it. She just looked at their hands, then at Charlotte, as if realizing that maybe humanity didn't have to be something she faced alone. "You don't have to know how," Charlotte whispered, squeezing her hand just slightly. "You don't have to be strong all the time. Sometimes it's okay to let someone stand with you." Emma's breath caught, slow and shaky, and for the first time, she didn't hide it. Charlotte felt something ripple through the space between them, Not romantic, not yet, but intimate in a way that outran romance. Something made of trust, of recognition, of comfort. Something that would take more time to understand, but was undeniable. Emma slowly let her fingers settle softly against Charlotte's hand, their palms warm, their breathing matching unconsciously, and in the stillness of that kitchen, in a home that had once felt too big for one person to fill, something quiet and sacred happened. They allowed silence to mean safety. That evening, after Emma returned from meetings and appointments and the exhausting work of pretending everything was fine, she found Charlotte sitting on the floor near the bookshelves, legs folded beneath her, reading quietly beneath the soft glow of a floor lamp. Charlotte looked up, and Emma didn't speak, just sank to the floor beside her, legs stretched out, hair slicked back from a long day, makeup slightly faded, no pretense, no armor. Charlotte said nothing. Emma rested her head back against the wall and let the silence hold her. After a while, Charlotte spoke gently. "When was the last time someone was just with you? No expectations, no questions, no wanting something from you." Emma gave a small, emotionless laugh. "Never." Charlotte's heart twisted. They sat in silence again, and Emma whispered, so softly that Charlotte almost missed it, "I don't know how to let people stay without wondering when they will leave." Charlotte turned toward her fully then, her light gray eyes searching Emma's hazel ones. "I don't know how to stay," Charlotte said softly. "Not until now." That sentence hung between them, unsteady, fragile, alive. And something shifted. Emma looked at her, not like the woman who made a deal with her, not like the billionaire who needed a wife for an arrangement, but like someone seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. They stayed like that for a while, two women sitting in the quiet warmth of a lamplit floor, and neither realized how close they had leaned toward each other until they felt it, breath against breath. It was not dramatic, not cinematic. It was quiet, honest, dangerous. Emma looked at Charlotte's lips. Just for a fraction of a second. Charlotte saw. Just for a fraction of a second. Neither moved forward or away, just stayed there, suspended, caught between distance and closeness, between contract and choice, between pretending and becoming. It was not a kiss, but it was the moment before a kiss. And sometimes, that moment is louder than the kiss itself. Emma was the first to pull back, but not abruptly, softly, almost regretfully, like someone in a museum stepping back from touching something too precious. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Rule 5. Charlotte's voice trembled, but it didn't break. "We're not breaking it." Emma looked at her, vulnerable and composed all at once. "We're not keeping it either." That night, neither of them slept well, not because they were restless, but because, for the first time, they were wide awake. Not pretending. Not performing. Awake. Charlotte noticed it before Emma did, the subtle shift in the air whenever other people spoke to her, the way Emma's hazel eyes would flicker with something she didn't recognize before, something that did not match the version of Emma Blackwood who was composed, rational, and emotionally untouchable, and it began the morning they attended an investor brunch together, where Charlotte had been invited as Emma's wife, or fiancée, or whatever the world believed now, and Charlotte, dressed in a soft cream blouse and tan trousers, her ash-blonde hair falling like silk around her shoulders, greeted people politely while Emma stood at her side, poised and elegant in a tailored navy suit, chestnut brown hair polished smooth, her posture tall and calm, except for that small shift in her jaw every time someone paid a little too much attention to Charlotte. Charlotte hadn't noticed it at first, too overwhelmed by the growing attention she was receiving from people who looked at her not with pity, not with disapproval, not even with curiosity. People looked at her with admiration, as though she was not just the quiet runaway bride from Boston, but someone interesting, someone comfortable beside power and not overshadowed by it, someone who somehow made Emma more human, more real, more approachable, and the more people noticed her, the more Emma seemed strangely unsettled. It wasn't until a young architect, sophisticated and slightly too charming, approached Charlotte during a break, engaging her in a conversation about literature and urban design, laughing a little too easily at her remarks, that Charlotte sensed Emma's stillness shift into something sharp, something unspoken but potent, and when Charlotte looked up, she found Emma watching them from across the room, not with anger, not with disdain, but with something startlingly close to confusion. As if Emma didn't understand the feeling herself. Later, in the car, Charlotte sat in the passenger seat, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger while Emma drove silently, her posture controlled, but her hands tighter on the steering wheel than usual. Charlotte tried to speak, but something about the atmosphere told her that silence held more truth than words right now. It wasn't until they reached a red light, and Emma's grip softened just slightly, that Charlotte finally asked gently, "Are you upset?" Emma didn't answer immediately, eyes fixed on the road even as she inhaled slowly. "No," she said eventually. But her voice was quiet, too quiet, and Charlotte, who had slowly learned the unspoken versions of Emma's emotions, knew that no really meant yes, but I don't know how to say it. "You left the conversation very abruptly," Charlotte said softly. Emma exhaled. "I don't trust him," she said, referring to the architect, but somehow Charlotte sensed the meaning was not about trust. "He was just being kind," Charlotte whispered. Emma's voice sharpened just slightly. "He was flirting." Charlotte felt something flutter in her chest. Not because of the man's attention, but because of Emma's tone. Possessive? Protective? Something far more subtle but undeniably emotional. Charlotte waited before asking, "Why does that bother you?" The light turned green, but Emma didn't drive. And that's when Charlotte saw it, the moment Emma realized she couldn't answer, without exposing something she wasn't ready to name. Finally, Emma drove forward, slowly, and said nothing. When they arrived home, Charlotte didn't push. She simply let the silence settle naturally. She knew Emma processed emotions like equations, slowly, methodically, carefully, afraid of miscalculations. That evening, Emma appeared unusually quiet, not distant, but thoughtful. They ate dinner together, in comfortable quiet. At one point, Charlotte reached across the table, not for Emma's hand, not for dramatic closeness, but simply to move her cup closer, and Emma's eyes followed her hand with such raw attention that Charlotte felt her heart speed up, even though nothing happened. It was then that Charlotte knew, with absolute certainty, that the world saw Emma Blackwood as cold because no one had ever been allowed to see her warmth. But Charlotte had. The next morning, Emma had a late meeting, meaning coffee on the balcony under pale sunlight. Charlotte stood beside her, wearing a soft ivory sweater, hair loose, face calm. Emma, now less armored, looked softer too, her hazel eyes reflecting the quiet morning sky. Charlotte finally said softly, "You weren't jealous of him. You were afraid." Emma looked at her, a flicker in her expression that Charlotte recognized immediately, vulnerability met by understanding. "Afraid of what?" Emma asked quietly, almost as if testing the question. Charlotte didn't hesitate. "Afraid that someone might see me the way you do." Silence. Not shock. Not denial. But silence filled with truth. Emma didn't answer, not at first. She simply breathed, and in that breath Charlotte felt everything Emma couldn't yet say. That night, they didn't go to separate rooms immediately. They stayed in the living area, sitting on the floor near the window, wrapped in the dim glow of warm lights, the world outside glittering like distant stars, and for the first time, neither of them felt the need to maintain distance. Charlotte, with careful honesty, said quietly, "You know, people keep asking me how I fit into your life." Emma turned. "What do you tell them?" Charlotte thought for a long moment before answering. "I don't fit into your life. We're building something new." Emma didn't speak, but something in her posture loosened, her shoulders dropping, her breath deepening, her guards softening like thawing ice. And then something happened, quiet, slow, not dramatic, not intense, but so real it felt like a heartbeat shared between two souls. Emma turned slightly toward Charlotte, and Charlotte leaned just enough to feel her shoulder brush against Emma's, just the faintest pressure, just enough for their warmth to touch. Emma didn't move away. She didn't tense. She simply let her shoulder rest gently against Charlotte's, and Charlotte felt something so small, so quiet, yet so irreversible. It felt like the beginning of something that did not belong to their agreement, did not belong to their rules.
It belonged to them.
Emma's voice was quiet, barely a whisper, like words afraid to be spoken into existence. "Charlotte," she said, and Charlotte looked at her, heart alive against her ribs. "This doesn't feel pretend anymore," Emma whispered. Charlotte didn't breathe.
She didn't speak.
She just watched Emma, noticing how her hazel eyes were soft now, almost fragile, how her hair was falling slightly out of place, how she looked more human than Charlotte had ever seen her look, human and trying. "I'm afraid of that," Emma whispered. Charlotte, for the first time in her life, didn't shrink back from someone else's fear. She leaned just a little closer, her shoulder now completely against Emma's, warmth shared, quiet understood, and said, "Maybe we shouldn't be afraid anymore." Emma looked at her, and Charlotte felt something indescribable happen. Not a kiss, not yet. But they were close, too close, close enough to feel each other's breath, close enough for their eyes to flicker down for just a second toward each other's lips, but not because of desire, not yet, but because of wonder. Wonder at how they were here, how they had found each other, how they had gone from strangers to something unbelievably tender without even realizing it was happening. Emma didn't move away this time. She didn't lean in either. She just whispered, so softly it felt like confession. "I don't know how to feel this without wanting more." Charlotte gently, bravely, answered, "Maybe wanting more is the point." And that was the moment they knew. They would never go back to pretending. Charlotte had grown used to the rhythm of the penthouse, the whisper of soft morning light through glass walls, the distant hum of the city below, the quiet places where silence felt sacred instead of heavy, and she had grown accustomed to Emma's presence in these moments, the way she would stand by the window with her hair falling more loosely now, hazel eyes softer, less guarded than before, as if the walls she had built weren't shattering but rather gently opening, letting light in, just a little, but enough for Charlotte to see the real woman who lived behind them, and it was that version of Emma that Charlotte had begun to miss when, one morning, she walked into the kitchen to find the space empty, the air too still, the routine disrupted, Emma absent. It didn't seem strange at first, but she wasn't at the balcony either, nor at the small corner table that had unofficially become her morning retreat, and when Charlotte peeked into the small office down the hall, she found Emma sitting at the desk, not polished, not controlled, but hunched slightly forward, tension clinging to her posture like frost. Her hair, usually sleek and smoothed behind her shoulders, was loose and uncombed, slight waves brushing her cheekbones, eyes red-rimmed though no tears remained. She didn't look broken. She looked like someone desperately trying not to break. Charlotte paused at the doorway, unsure if she should step forward or step back, but before she could decide, Emma spoke, her voice unexpectedly small. "It's happening," she whispered, not turning around. "They're preparing to take it from me." Charlotte's breath caught. "The company?" Emma nodded once, slow, deliberate. "My grandmother called. She wants to take decision authority. She says I'll keep the title, but not the power." Charlotte stepped into the room now, quietly, barefoot, wearing her soft white sweater, pale skin glowing faintly in the morning light. "You built it," she said softly. "They can't take something you built." Emma finally turned, and Charlotte's heart clenched, because Emma wasn't wearing the face of the CEO today, nor the controlled woman who pressed her feelings into order, nor even the Emma who let herself be soft at the window. This Emma looked unguarded, tired,
Scared.
human. And then she said, with a voice so low it might have been a confession rather than a statement, "They can take anything, Charlotte. They always do." And those words, felt like the deepest truth Charlotte had ever heard from her. Charlotte didn't hesitate this time. She walked forward until she stood inches away from Emma, not touching her, not crowding her, but close enough that Emma could feel her warmth. "Emma," Charlotte whispered, "you are not something to be taken." Emma didn't answer, just closed her eyes, shoulders trembling slightly, not because she was breaking but because, for once, she wasn't trying so hard not to. Charlotte's voice softened. "You don't have to hold the world alone." Emma opened her eyes slowly, and in those hazel eyes, Charlotte saw it, clear and undeniable. Fear, vulnerability, longing, and something else, something that looked like surrender, not of strength, but of solitude. Emma whispered, "I don't know how to let someone hold it with me." Charlotte swallowed, her light gray eyes glistening. "Then let me try." Silence. But not empty silence. Full silence. Silence thick with unsaid words. Emma's breathing became uneven. She looked at Charlotte, not sharply, not cautiously, but fully, with an expression that felt like the beginning of a question. Charlotte stepped just a little closer, feeling Emma's breath now, warm and shaky. Emma whispered, "This is not part of the rules." Charlotte whispered back, "Maybe the rules were never meant for this." Emma's gaze flickered downward, just for a second, to Charlotte's lips, and Charlotte felt her breath catch, her heart pounding like something alive and awake in her chest, like everything in the room had gone quiet except the space between them. Emma took a step closer, closing the last inches of distance, but she didn't touch her.
She didn't reach.
She just stood so close that Charlotte felt the faint tremor in her breath, saw the softness in her amber-flecked eyes, heard her whisper, "I am terrified of this." Charlotte smiled, though her eyes were wet. "That's how you know it's real." And then it happened, slowly, like a sunrise creeping over a dark horizon. Emma lifted her hand, uncertain, trembling, not like a CEO, not like someone in control, but like a woman reaching for something she hadn't let herself hope for. Her fingers brushed Charlotte's cheek, just a light, trembling touch, and Charlotte leaned into it, gently, willingly. Emma held her there, her touch still soft, reverent, her eyes searching Charlotte's, asking permission without saying a word. And Charlotte, without speaking, gave it, by staying. Emma took a breath, slow, unsteady, and then, in the softest, most careful motion, she leaned in. Their foreheads touched first, not their lips, their breath mingling, their hands finding each other without thinking, their hearts pounding between them like some invisible electricity waiting to bridge an impossible space. Charlotte whispered, so quietly Emma almost didn't hear, "It's okay." Emma, eyes closed, breathed, "Stay." "Always," Charlotte whispered. And then Emma kissed her. Not rushed, not hungry, not uncertain, but slow, impossibly slow, like she was memorizing the moment before it even finished happening, like she had waited her whole life to find a kiss that didn't take, didn't demand, didn't perform, but simply felt. Charlotte kissed her back with equal softness, careful not to rush, careful not to break whatever sacred thing was unfolding between them, their lips barely moving, their breaths trembling, their hands clasping like they had just made a promise neither had spoken aloud, but both understood. When they finally pulled away, neither stepped back. Neither spoke. Emma's forehead rested gently against Charlotte's, and their breathing calmed together, a quiet rhythm in the silence. Emma's voice broke the stillness, low and raw. "I don't want to pretend anymore." Charlotte closed her eyes, her voice a whisper of truth. "Then let's stop pretending." And Emma, who had spent years building walls, defending her heart, mastering the art of distance, did something she hadn't done since the day Charlotte ran into her life. She smiled. Not the perfect public smile, not the guarded one, but a real, fragile, beautiful one. And Charlotte smiled too, because something had changed. Not broken, not fallen apart, changed. Something real had begun. And this time, neither of them was afraid. Charlotte woke up the morning after the kiss, and for the first time in years she didn't feel lost, heavy, or terrified of what the day would ask of her. Instead, she felt something still and quiet, something that didn't come from perfection or certainty or safety, but from something she had never truly known in her life. Being wanted, not as a daughter fulfilling expectations, not as a bride completing a transaction, but as a woman who had been seen and still chosen, and as sunlight crept softly through the sheer curtains of the guest room, she lay there quietly, listening to her own heartbeat, remembering the feel of Emma's hand pressed gently against her cheek, the warmth of her lips, the trembling exhale between their breaths, the whisper that wasn't dramatic but real. "I don't want to pretend anymore," and Charlotte realized something even more terrifying than being trapped: being free. Because now freedom wasn't an idea or an escape. It was a person, it was a choice, and choices were terrifying because they were real. And Emma, in the room across the hall, stood barefoot at the window like she always did, except today. She didn't look like the Emma who was preparing to build a facade before leaving for the office. Today she looked like Emma who'd been awake most of the night, not because she was working, but because she was thinking, feeling, terrified in a way that had nothing to do with business, nothing to do with legacy, and everything to do with Charlotte Hayes, the woman with ash blonde hair and light gray eyes who had walked into her life uninvited, unplanned, unexpected, and undone her in the quietest and most irreversible way. Emma didn't usually struggle with clarity. She knew what she wanted, what she didn't, what she could control, what she needed to protect. But this was different because now her heart was involved, and the heart did not obey spreadsheets, family pressure, or rule number 5 of their contract, which ironically had been designed to protect them from exactly this. She didn't hear Charlotte approach, but she felt her. The soft shape of her presence reflected faintly in the glass, and when she turned, Charlotte stood in the doorway, barefoot, hair loose around her face, delicate white sweater brushing softly against her arms, and Emma felt something in her chest that made her feel almost unsteady, like gravity had subtly changed its pull. They didn't speak at first. They simply stood in the morning light, looking at each other, and 1,000 unspoken things lived in that silence, not heavy, but full of everything that had changed in a single moment the day before. Charlotte was first to speak, her voice soft but clear. "I'm not asking what it meant," she whispered, "because I already know. I don't need you to explain it." Emma exhaled, something fragile in her eyes. "And what do you think it meant?" Charlotte stepped forward until she was close enough to see the faint freckles on Emma's nose, the softness of her lips, the vulnerability in her hazel eyes. "I think it meant we stopped pretending." Emma didn't look away. "That terrifies me," she whispered. Charlotte felt that like a warm truth. "Me too." But she wasn't finished. She added gently, "But I'm more afraid of going back to pretending." And that was it. The exact difference between them now and who they were before. Emma nodded slowly, almost like someone accepting a verdict she already knew but had been waiting to hear aloud. Her voice was quieter when she spoke. "I don't know how to do this." Charlotte shook her head slowly. "We don't have to know. We just have to choose." Emma looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment, Charlotte saw it. Emma Blackwood, the woman who had built skyscrapers and empires and armor around herself, was finally letting someone in. And it wasn't casual, it wasn't impulsive, it wasn't naive. It was deliberate, terrifying, and real. Emma's hand lifted, just slightly, brushing the edge of Charlotte's hair, the softest touch, and Charlotte's breath caught because this wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a rehearsed gesture. It wasn't a performance. It was tenderness, raw tenderness, and it was so much more intimate than anything physical. But the world would not stay paused just because they had changed. Later that afternoon, Emma had meetings, negotiations, and a tense lunch with her grandmother, which Charlotte did not attend but felt the echo of through the tone in Emma's voice when she returned. Not defeated, not cold, but unsettled. Emma didn't speak at first, just paced near the large window in her office, her elegant suit looking more like armor today, her chestnut brown hair perfectly controlled, but her eyes, Charlotte noticed, more tired than she had ever seen them. "She doesn't care that I built it," Emma said finally. "She just wants to control it." Charlotte stepped closer. "She can't take away who you are." Emma looked at her, not angry, not skeptical, just tired. "But do you know what scares me? If I let you be part of this, if I let you matter to this part of my life, then I'm not just risking the business anymore." Charlotte's voice was soft but unwavering. "You're risking your heart." Emma didn't speak. That was the answer. Later, at a private investor dinner, Emma introduced Charlotte with words Charlotte had not expected. Not as fiancé, not as contractual partner, but as someone who has influenced my life more than I expected. Those were strong words. Words that made people look. Words that surprised even Emma herself. And for maybe the first time, Emma didn't try to take them back. Charlotte watched the faces of the people around them. Shock, curiosity, hesitation, but she didn't feel fear anymore. Because suddenly, she realized something. Emma wasn't shielding her. Emma was standing beside her. After the dinner, while waiting for the car, Emma stood quieter than usual, her posture less guarded, her hazel eyes less calculating. Charlotte stood next to her, not touching, just present. And that presence, Emma realized, was something she had never had her entire life. Someone who didn't try to fix her. Someone who didn't need her power. Someone who stayed. In the car, Charlotte finally spoke, her voice steady. Emma, I'm not in your life because of the agreement. Emma looked at her, heart racing. Charlotte continued, I am not here because it's convenient, or because I need saving, or because it benefits me. She paused, breath unsteady but voice strong. I am here because I choose to be here. I choose you. And that was the moment Emma stopped looking at Charlotte like someone who had entered her life accidentally. She began looking at her like someone she could lose. And that terrified her. That night, Emma disappeared into her office. Not coldly, not to avoid her, but because she needed time to think. Because for the first time, she had something to lose. Charlotte didn't try to follow. She didn't knock. She did something harder. She waited. Hours later, Emma came out. Not composed, not controlled. Just real. She approached Charlotte slowly, her breathing unsteady, and said in a voice that was barely a whisper, I don't know how to be the woman you choose. Charlotte looked up, eyes soft, certain. You don't have to know. You just have to let me choose you anyway. Something broke then. Not painfully. Something that needed to break. Emma slowly sat beside Charlotte, not touching her, but close enough that their hands almost brushed. Finally, she said the most honest words she had ever spoken in her life. I am afraid of being loved, Charlotte. Charlotte didn't look away. Then I'll love you gently. Those words didn't lead to a kiss. They didn't need to. They led to something greater. Emma stayed. Close. And for once, not in control. And that, for Emma Blackwood, was love. Quiet. Terrifying. Real. Charlotte had always imagined heartbreak as something loud, something that shattered across a room in screaming voices and slammed doors. But as she watched Emma move further away, not physically, but emotionally, she realized heartbreak could also be quiet, a fragile shift in the way someone looked at you, a hesitation in their voice, a silence where warmth used to be, and ever since their kiss, ever since Charlotte had said the words, I choose you, and Emma had stayed and allowed herself to be seen, something had changed for both of them. Not in a loud, dramatic way one might expect, but in small and sacred ways, like the way Emma lingered longer in the doorway after conversations, as if unsure whether to stay or leave, or the way Charlotte noticed Emma's fingers twitch slightly when their hands brushed, but she didn't pull away like before. Yet now, after days of this new softness, something else began creeping in, fear. Not the fear of feeling, but the fear of losing. And in Emma, that fear didn't come as panic, but as retreat. It began subtly. The way her voice began sounding a little more formal, a little more composed when speaking to Charlotte, like she was slipping back into her armor. The way she answered with, I'm fine, when Charlotte asked how her day was, even when her eyes told an entirely different story. The way she didn't reach for Charlotte's hand anymore, even though Charlotte could see, through the smallest tension in her shoulders, that she wanted to. The world had shifted too. Word had begun to spread, quietly at first, but inevitably, because wealth and beauty and rumors about a runaway bride never stayed hidden long, and though Charlotte hadn't done anything but exist beside Emma, she had become a story, a potential headline, and one afternoon, a journalist, bold, invasive, smiling too politely to be sincere, asked her in front of Emma, so, who saved whom? Did the billionaire rescue the runaway bride, or did the bride rescue the billionaire? Emma froze. Charlotte felt the words like a sting, not because of their brazenness, but because for the first time, she saw Emma hesitate to answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she was afraid of telling the truth. that they had rescued each other. The silence between them after that moment lingered long, too long. That evening, Emma didn't come back to the penthouse until late. Charlotte waited, not impatiently, not possessively, but with a quiet kind of ache that felt like waiting for a part of herself to come home. Emma entered silently, the elevator doors opening softly, and Charlotte saw her standing there, still in her heels, hair perfectly styled, eyes exhausted, expression unreadable. Not because she was emotionless, but because she was holding too many emotions at once. "Long day?" Charlotte asked gently, offering the same tea Emma always touched but rarely drank when she was overwhelmed. Emma didn't take it. Instead, she said quietly, "We need to slow down." Charlotte's heart didn't shatter, but it trembled. "Slow down," she repeated, setting the tea down. Emma nodded, voice composed but fragile. "Things are moving too fast. People are talking. They're asking questions. You're being pulled into this world, my world, and it's messy, and it's brutal, and—" Charlotte stepped forward. "And you're afraid I'll get hurt." Emma exhaled, a painful, reluctant truth. "Yes." Charlotte held her gaze. "Or are you afraid you'll be the one to hurt me?" Emma didn't answer. And that was the answer. For days, Emma kept her distance, not cruelly, not coldly, but cautiously. She spoke to Charlotte kindly, but gently moved away when she noticed their closeness deepening. She stayed longer at the office. She avoided long conversations. She didn't make coffee in the mornings. She didn't linger in doorways. She didn't look at Charlotte the same way, not because the feeling had faded, but because it had grown. Too much. Too fast. Too real. Charlotte felt it. Not as rejection, but as retreat. A retreat born from fear, not indifference. And though she tried to respect Emma's space, her heart ached every time she walked into a room and found Emma standing by the window, staring out, not because she loved the view, but because she was hiding behind it. The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening when Emma's grandmother, elegant, ruthless, eyes like glass, showed up unannounced at the penthouse, her heels clicking sharply like a judge arriving for a sentencing. Charlotte opened the door, greeted with a polite smile, but the grandmother's gaze sliced through her like a knife. "Where's Emma?" she asked coldly. "Working," Charlotte said calmly, though her heart pounded. "You are not invited," the woman replied, stepping past her. "But then again, neither were you. And yet here you are, living in a world that was not made for girls who run from their own weddings." Charlotte didn't flinch. She didn't cower. She didn't apologize. She simply said softly, "Maybe this world needs people who run toward themselves." For a fraction of a second, the woman hesitated, as if surprised by resistance, but she quickly regained composure. "You are not permanent," she said. "You may have her attention now, but you are not what lasts." And with that, she left. Emma returned later to find Charlotte sitting silently on the floor by the window, knees pulled to her chest. She sat beside her, not too close, not too far. Just beside her. "She came," Charlotte whispered. Emma closed her eyes. "I know. She doesn't think I belong here," Charlotte said, not bitterly, just truthfully. Emma inhaled deeply. "Neither do I." Charlotte turned sharply. Emma's voice cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but softly, painfully. "I don't think you belong in this world, Charlotte. It will swallow you. It's already trying." Charlotte's voice trembled, but it was steady enough to ask, "Or are you just afraid I'll belong so much that I'll matter?" Emma looked at her then. The real look, the one without shields, and for the first time, Charlotte saw it clearly. Emma wasn't afraid of losing the company. She wasn't afraid of judgment. She wasn't afraid of scandal. Emma Blackwood, the woman who had survived scrutiny, legacy, and loneliness, was now afraid of one thing: losing Charlotte. "I don't know how to keep you," Emma whispered. Charlotte's eyes softened, filled with warmth, strength, love, the kind that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, simply stands firm. "You don't keep people," she whispered. "You choose them." Emma's eyes glistened, and her voice, raw, unguarded, came out softer than a breath. Then please, she whispered, don't walk away from me. Charlotte didn't. She reached out, the same way she did the day they signed nothing but shared everything, and took Emma's hand, not as a promise, not as possession, but as choice. I'm not walking away, she said softly. Emma, I'm staying. And for the first time, Emma believed her. Truly believed her. Not because she said it, but because Emma was finally willing to accept it. Then something happened, not a kiss, not passion, not desperation, something much more intimate. Emma leaned sideways, not fully, not dramatically, and rested her head, very gently, on Charlotte's shoulder. And Charlotte didn't move, didn't react. She just stayed. A place where Emma could rest. A place Emma had never had before. And in that stillness, something wordless was spoken. Something stronger than fear, stronger than contracts, stronger than legacy. Something like love. Real love. Unconditional love. The kind people don't perform. The kind people just are. And Emma whispered, barely audible, I'm scared. Charlotte replied softly, so am I. They stayed like that a long time. And for once, fear didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like proof that what they had was real enough to lose. And real enough to fight for. Charlotte had never been to a gala that felt less like a celebration and more like a courtroom, but that was exactly what the Blackwood Foundation annual charity evening felt like, as the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and expensive laughter, where power was measured not by kindness, but by influence. And though she wore a soft champagne silk dress and her ash-blonde hair curled lightly at the ends, Charlotte felt out of place. Not because she was unwelcome, but because she was unprepared for how much the world suddenly cared about who she was to Emma Blackwood. Emma, in a tailored black evening suit, impossibly elegant, undeniably controlled, stood beside her. But today, something was different. Emma didn't stand in front of her to shield her, didn't stand apart from her to hide her. She stood beside her, close enough that their hands brushed every now and then, not by accident, but because neither moved away, and that slight, silent closeness was louder than any introduction. People looked. They whispered. They speculated. And then someone said it, too loudly for it to be accidental. Is that the runaway bride? Followed by another voice. The one living with the Blackwood heiress? Emma heard it. Charlotte saw her hear it. But Emma didn't flinch, didn't correct, didn't hide. Instead, she surprised everyone, including Charlotte, by simply saying calmly, clearly, yes. The room went quiet. But Emma didn't stop. She didn't run from something. She continued, voice steady, composed, graceful. She ran towards something better. Cameras clicked. Eyes widened. Charlotte felt her breath catch, because this wasn't performance. This wasn't strategy. This was choice. Emma didn't touch her. Not yet, but she stood closer, and that was louder than any public display of affection could have been. Later, during a press moment, a microphone was pushed toward them. Miss Blackwood, are you confirming that you and Miss Hayes are involved? Emma didn't look at the camera. She looked at Charlotte. And then, with a softness that no reporter was prepared for, she said, I am confirming that she matters to me. And Charlotte felt something shift, deeply, permanently. Because it wasn't a label. It wasn't a statement. It was truth. And truth is not something Emma ever used lightly. After the interviews, Emma stepped away briefly for a board discussion, leaving Charlotte momentarily alone, surrounded by murmurs, curiosity, and a few women who looked at her with polite confusion. One of them approached, elegant, composed, rich in every way possible except warmth, and asked with a cold smile, Do you really think she'll keep you? Charlotte didn't answer immediately, not because she had no answer, but because she understood something now. Emma was not about keeping. Emma was about choosing. So Charlotte simply said, She doesn't keep things. She builds them. The woman fell silent. When Emma returned, she didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. She simply offered her hand, not theatrically, not dramatically, but calmly, naturally, as though it had always belonged there. And Charlotte took it. No hesitation. No hiding. Cameras flashed. The world noticed. But for once, Emma didn't care who saw. On the ride home, they sat in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that meant there were words still forming, heavy and real. Charlotte finally turned to her. "You didn't have to say those things tonight." Emma nodded slowly. "I know." Charlotte watched her. "But you wanted to." Emma's voice was soft when she answered. "I needed to." Charlotte felt something warm bloom quietly inside her. Because they needed to hear it? Emma looked at her then, hazel eyes softer than any city light. "Because you needed to hear it." Silence. Stronger than words. They arrived home. Emma didn't go to her office. She didn't retreat to her room. She didn't hide. She simply stood there, in the living room, under soft light, looking both powerful and fragile in a way Charlotte had never seen. "I'm done pretending I don't care," she said quietly. Charlotte stepped closer, heart fast and calm at the same time. "So am I." Emma reached out, not hesitantly this time, but surely, taking Charlotte's hand in a way that felt nothing like performance, nothing like a contract, and everything like a beginning. "Charlotte Hayes," she whispered, "I don't want convenience. I don't want safety. I want you." Charlotte's voice trembled, not with fear, but with the feeling of being truly chosen. "Then choose me." "I already have," Emma whispered. And this time, when Emma leaned forward, it wasn't a kiss like the first one, trembling and careful. It was steady,
Certain.
and when they finally let go, neither stepped back, because there was no back to go to anymore. There was only forward. Charlotte had thought that once Emma chose her, once she had stood in front of cameras and investors and critics and said she mattered, everything would feel easier, lighter, clearer, but she quickly learned that when feelings become real, the world becomes louder, harsher, more critical, because now it wasn't just speculation or rumor. Now there were headlines: Charlotte Hayes, the runaway bride living in the Blackwood penthouse, and reporters waiting outside, and opinion pieces calling there. Relationship strategic, calculated, a publicity move, and Charlotte knew none of them understood that the most important things between her and Emma had never been spoken in front of anyone. They had been spoken in silence, in vulnerability, in the absence of performance. But even truth had consequences. The first sign of real damage wasn't to Emma. It was to Charlotte. Someone dug up pictures of her wedding that never happened, her fiancé's confused statements, articles questioning who she really was, a naive girl, a manipulator, an opportunist, a liar, a social climber, and Charlotte tried to ignore it, tried to stay composed. But what broke her heart wasn't what they said about her, it was what they assumed about Emma, that she was being fooled, or worse, that she couldn't possibly actually care. Emma returned home one evening and found Charlotte sitting quietly by the piano, not crying, not angry, just quiet.
Too quiet.
Emma sat beside her, still in her elegant black suit, chestnut brown hair pinned loosely, posture softer than usual. "You saw the articles," she said gently. Charlotte nodded. "They think I'm using you." Emma hesitated. "Are you?" Charlotte looked at her with light gray eyes, tired but steady. "I ran from a wedding I didn't want," she whispered. "But I ran toward myself. I didn't know I was running toward you." It was the kind of answer that didn't deny, didn't justify, didn't beg. It simply told the truth. Emma felt her chest tighten. She reached out, gently brushing Charlotte's hair back. "Do you regret running?" Charlotte shook her head, a faint tremor in her voice. "I regret that I spent so long not knowing what I wanted." Emma exhaled slowly. "And now?" Charlotte looked at her. Not at the cameras, not at the world, at Emma. "Now I know." Emma didn't speak.
She didn't need to.
But outside, the storm was growing. The board called an emergency meeting. Emma was summoned. Not about the company's performance, not about finances, but about her personal choices. Sitting across from polished men in gray suits and her grandmother, pristine and unreadable, Emma understood every room's rules, and this one did not welcome softness. "We are not here to dictate your personal relationships," one man said, in a tone that clearly meant they were. "We simply believe that the company needs stability. Right now, all anyone sees is scandal." Emma held her posture, calm but not cold, elegant but not evasive. Her grandmother leaned forward. Control the story, or the story will control you. Emma responded quietly. Sometimes the truth doesn't need controlling. There was a pause. Not acceptance, but discomfort. Be careful, her grandmother said, eyes sharp. People like her don't stay. Emma's hand, hidden below the table, clenched so tightly she felt her pulse in her fingertips. She already has. That night, when Emma returned to the penthouse, she didn't look elegant. She didn't look composed. She looked hurt. Not just tired. Not just overwhelmed. Hurt. Charlotte, who had been sitting on the floor by the window reading, stood up when she saw her. Emma didn't speak. She just walked to the window, staring out at the darkened skyline, the city she had built her life around, the city that now questioned whether she had the right to love the way she did. Charlotte walked silently to her, not touching, just standing beside her. Emma's voice, when it finally came, was so quiet Charlotte almost missed it. They think you're temporary. She paused. They expect you to leave. Charlotte's heart pressed painfully against her ribs. And what do you think? Emma closed her eyes. I think I have spent my whole life preparing for people to leave. She took a breath. Slow. Unsteady. And I don't know how to feel about someone who stays. Charlotte didn't speak right away. She looked at Emma, not at the CEO, not at the billionaire, but at the woman with hazel eyes full of fear and longing. Then she stepped closer. Just one step. But it changed everything. Look at me, she whispered. Emma turned, slowly, reluctantly, vulnerably, and Charlotte stepped closer until there was only space for truth between them. I am not here to take anything from you, Charlotte said, voice soft but fierce. But I am willing to help you carry it, if you let me. Emma's breath hitched. I don't know how to share the weight. Charlotte reached up, gently touching Emma's cheek. Then lean, even if it's just for a moment. Emma didn't think. She didn't debate. She simply let go. Just a little. She leaned forward, slowly, resting her forehead softly against Charlotte's, breath trembling, and something in her, a tension, a silence, a lifelong restraint, finally began to unravel. Charlotte didn't move. She just steadied her, held her there, until Emma whispered something so small and raw Charlotte felt it rather than heard it. I'm tired of fighting everything alone. Charlotte's voice cracked, but she smiled. Then stop pushing away the people who want to fight with you. Emma's breathing unsteadied. Her voice was barely a breath. Why aren't you leaving? And Charlotte answered, the simplest, purest truth she had ever spoken. Because I love you. Silence filled the room. Not shocked silence. Not fearful silence. But sacred silence. Emma lifted her eyes slowly, hazel meeting light gray, and Charlotte didn't flinch, didn't look away. I love you, she said again, steady, brave, unashamed. Not because it's safe. Not because it's easy. Not because it's perfect. But because it's you. Emma didn't speak. Her eyes glistened. Her breath trembled. And then, very quietly, very honestly, she whispered, I don't know how to say it. Charlotte smiled gently. You don't have to say it yet. But Emma took a breath. And then another. Then, in a voice so unsteady, so human, so breakable and sincere, she whispered, stay. Charlotte closed her eyes. Always. And then, only then did Emma speak, softly, honestly, imperfectly, her first confession. I don't know how to love like everyone else, she whispered. But I know that I love you. And that, those words, not perfect, not polished, not rehearsed, but trembling, real, raw, and true, were the most beautiful words Charlotte had ever heard. They didn't kiss. Not yet. They stood there, foreheads touching, breathing softly, holding hands, holding truth. And for the first time, love didn't feel like a risk. It felt like rest. Charlotte never imagined that loving Emma would mean entering rooms where affection felt like rebellion, but this time she walked into the Blackwood boardroom not as a guest, not as a temporary complication, but as someone Emma had chosen, and though she wore a soft pale gray dress with her ash blonde hair loose around her shoulders and elegant but calm, she felt her heartbeat pulsing loud in her chest, not from fear, but from certainty. Emma stood at the long polished table, surrounded by shareholders, lawyers, and at the head of the table sat the Blackwood matriarch, cold, composed, and powerful, her hazel eyes a harsher, older reflection of Emma's own. Emma wore her tailored charcoal suit, hair neatly swept back, but today, she didn't look like she was performing control. She looked like she had nothing left to hide. The meeting was not about numbers. It was about image, about legacy, about the fact that Emma had not only chosen someone unexpected to stand beside her, but that she had done so openly. "We are not questioning your personal life," one man said, voice dripping with polite dishonesty. "We are questioning its effect on your leadership." Another added, "This relationship will cost us investors." The media is framing it as emotional instability. Charlotte felt the words hit Emma, not in anger, but in fear. Not fear of losing the company, but fear of being used as proof that she wasn't strong enough. Emma's grandmother spoke last, voice like glass. "This is not about whether you care for her. It is about whether you are willing to sacrifice what you have built for something that will not last." Silence. Ice cold. Emma didn't look at her grandmother. She looked at Charlotte. And Charlotte, who had lived her whole life believing her voice didn't matter, stepped forward. Not dramatically. Not to attack. But simply to be heard. "I understand your fear," she said softly, surprising everyone with how calm she sounded. "You think love makes people weaker. That feelings cause distraction, vulnerability, loss of control." She looked at Emma, not to seek approval, but to speak truth. "But I have seen Emma when she is not performing strength. And when she has someone to trust, someone to lean on, someone who sees her as more than what she's built, she is not weaker. She is stronger." The room fell into a stunned silence. Charlotte continued, voice steady, gentle, unwavering. "Power is not love's enemy. Isolation is." No one spoke. Not even Emma's grandmother. And that was when Emma stood, not to defend her position, not to fight them, but simply to speak truth. "I have spent years building something I can be proud of," she said, voice low but clear. "But I built it alone. And no matter how successful I became, it was always empty." The air shifted. Not dramatically, but undeniably. Emma stepped forward beside Charlotte, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her. For the first time, Emma continued, "I am not afraid of losing something. I am afraid of losing someone. And that makes me more human, not less capable." Her grandmother stared at her, expression unreadable. Emma turned, looking at the table, then back at Charlotte. "I will not marry for convenience," she said, her voice steady. "I will not marry for image, expectations, or a legacy." She paused, and then said the words no one expected, but Charlotte knew were true. "I will not marry for the company. I will marry for love." A silence, so heavy and powerful, fell over the room that it felt like the very walls had heard something sacred. There were no arguments after that. No applause. No declarations. Just truth. And truth, when spoken with courage, doesn't require permission. On the drive back, Emma didn't speak. Neither did Charlotte. They didn't need to. When they entered the penthouse, Emma finally turned, looking at her with something raw, reverent, and quiet. She didn't touch her. She didn't kiss her. She just whispered. "I meant every word." Charlotte, with tears not of pain but of recognition, whispered back, "I know." And that, more than any ring, any kiss, any performance, felt like the beginning of something real. Charlotte didn't think anything could shake her after the boardroom moment, after hearing Emma say she would marry for love and not for the company, but she quickly learned that confessions made out of courage and declarations made out of truth did not erase pressure. They intensified it, and the world adjusted accordingly. It didn't attack Emma. Not directly. It attacked through the weakest-looking point, Charlotte. The media painted her as a distraction. Investors saw her as a liability. The narrative shifted from Emma's strength to her vulnerability, and in their world, vulnerability was weakness. It wasn't long before Emma's grandmother arrived unannounced, carrying neither anger nor arrogance, but something far worse: strategy. She didn't speak to Emma first. She spoke to Charlotte. They sat across from each other in the sunlit lounge, the city shimmering below them, and the woman who had built and broken legacies with the same calm hand said quietly, "Emma has built her empire from discipline, not from emotion. But now, emotion is jeopardizing what she created." Charlotte didn't flinch. "She is still strong." The older woman's eyes didn't harden. They softened, which was somehow worse.
"Yes."
But strength has never been the question. Stability has. Silence. Sharp, alive, waiting. "You make her less predictable," she said. "She thinks longer before making decisions. She hesitates instead of reacts. She protects instead of wins." Charlotte's heart twisted, because she knew it was true, and yet completely false in the ways that mattered. "She's better," Charlotte whispered. Emma's grandmother nodded, not kindly. "She is happier." But happiness and leadership do not often coexist. Then came the strike.
Calm.
Measured.
Surgical.
"I am not asking if you love her," the matriarch said. "I am asking if you are willing to step away so she can be who she was meant to be." Something inside Charlotte froze. "You want me to leave?" The woman didn't blink. "I want you to think." She placed a document on the table. "I am prepared to restore full decision authority to Emma, sign over my remaining shares, and secure her position beyond all interference. But only if she stands alone." Charlotte stared. "She would never accept that." "She will," the grandmother whispered, "if it means protecting you." Those words hurt more than any accusation. Something deeper formed in Charlotte then. Not doubt, not insecurity, but a realization. Loving someone powerful meant sometimes protecting them not with presence, but with sacrifice. That night, she didn't tell Emma what happened. Emma was quiet, less tense than before, but carrying something restless behind her hazel eyes. "People think I've changed," she said softly, sitting by the glass wall overlooking the glittering city. Charlotte joined her. "You have." But she said it not as a warning, as something beautiful. Emma leaned into the glass, her reflection fragile under the city lights. "They say I hesitate more, that I feel more." Charlotte turned to her. "That's not weakness." Emma met her eyes.
Soft. Raw.
"It feels like it." Charlotte didn't argue. She simply touched her hand.
Small.
Steady. And Emma broke a little, not into pieces, but into truth. "I don't know how to be strong and be loved," she whispered. Charlotte held her gaze. "Maybe you don't have to choose." Emma looked at her then, with something like fear, but not of loss, not of rejection, but of hope. Real hope. "What if they're right?" Emma whispered. "What if loving you makes me unsure?" Charlotte smiled, soft, heartbreaking, true. "Then maybe being unsure is human." Emma closed her eyes, not to shut her out, but to let her in. When she opened them, she leaned, not dramatically, not passionately, but restfully. Her forehead against Charlotte's, hands barely touching, breath quiet. "I don't want to be strong without you," she whispered. And that was the most intimate thing she had ever said. The next day, Charlotte sat alone in the kitchen, fingers trembling around a cup she couldn't bring herself to drink from. She could leave. She now understood that. She could walk away, protect Emma's empire, her legacy, give her everything except love, and the world would applaud her for it. But they wouldn't know. Not really. They would know that Emma wouldn't win alone. She would simply keep losing the one thing she never thought she could have, a life that felt real. That afternoon, Emma found her standing on the balcony, her ash-blonde hair dancing softly in the wind, her light gray eyes filled with something raw, not doubt, but decision. "You're thinking about leaving," Emma said quietly. Charlotte didn't lie. "I thought maybe it would protect you." Emma didn't look surprised. She simply walked closer. Not to stop her. To stand with her. "Protect me," Emma said, voice quieter. "Or spare yourself?" The truth hurt. Because it was both. Charlotte looked at her. The woman she had run toward, not away from. The woman who stood not behind power but beside it, and she felt something surge in her. Not fragile, not hesitant, but sure. I don't want to be something you have to choose between, she whispered. Emma reached out, brushing Charlotte's trembling hand. You're not something I choose between, she said softly. You're the reason I finally get to choose for myself. And just like that, the decision became clear. Not just for love, but for truth. For freedom. Not the kind you run to, the kind you build. Together. Stay, Emma whispered, not pleading, not commanding, but requesting. Not because it's safe. Not because it's easy. Stay because it's real. Charlotte's breath trembled. I'm staying, she whispered. Not because I'm needed, but because I am wanted. Emma's voice broke, beautifully, honestly. I love you, she said, not carefully, not perfectly, but simply. And that time, the words did not tremble. And Charlotte smiled, as someone who knew exactly where she belonged. They didn't kiss. Not yet. Because some love doesn't rush. Some love waits. Some love breathes. Stability wasn't something Emma Blackwood expected to find with another person, especially not with a woman who showed up in her life wearing a wedding dress she didn't want, running from a future that never felt like hers. Yet on a quiet morning months later, she stood on the balcony overlooking the city she had once believed she needed to control to survive, and beside her stood Charlotte, barefoot, hair loose, eyes soft. Not as someone she had saved or someone she had chosen for convenience, but as someone she had chosen again and again and again, every day after. There was no event tonight, no board meeting, no public appearance, no cameras, just the two of them, and yet it felt more important than any of those things ever had, because today there were no performances, no pretending, no disguises. Emma turned to Charlotte, her hazel eyes warmer than they had ever been, and whispered, "Do you remember the day we met?" Charlotte smiled, light gray eyes filled with something gentle and knowing. "You asked if I needed a ride." Emma shook her head, voice soft. "I didn't realize then. I wasn't just offering you a ride. I was asking if you could stay." Charlotte didn't speak. She just moved closer, not urgently, not dramatically, but with the quiet familiarity of someone who belonged. Emma continued, voice unsteady but honest. "They thought I would build my life on legacy." She paused, looked into Charlotte's eyes. "But I am building it on choice." Charlotte swallowed softly, her voice a whisper. "And what are you choosing?" Emma took a slow breath, stepped closer, gently taking Charlotte's hand, not like a question, but like a promise. "You." There were no cameras, no witnesses, no staged perfection. Just two women standing in a place where walls had once been built to keep people out, and now they stood with windows wide open. Emma reached into her pocket, not elegantly, not perfectly, but nervously, like someone doing something real. She held a ring, simple, not flashy, not loud, a quiet circle of silver and light, something that felt like her, something that felt like them. "Charlotte Hayes," she said quietly, voice shaking in the most beautiful way, "I don't want a wife for the company. I don't want a partner for appearances. I don't want someone to just share my life with." Her eyes softened, tears forming gently. "I want someone who makes life feel like mine." Charlotte's breath caught. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she held her hand. "I don't know what love is supposed to look like for everyone else." A pause. A confession. "But I know what it feels like with you." Charlotte felt her own tears now, soft and quiet. Emma exhaled, the final truth coming out not like a rehearsed line but like something that had been waiting to be said for a lifetime. "Will you marry me? Not because we need to, not because we're expected to, but because we choose to?" Charlotte didn't answer with words first. She stepped forward, gently taking Emma's face in her hands, forehead touching hers, their breath steadying together. And in the quiet that followed, Charlotte whispered the only answer that mattered. "I already have." Emma's breath trembled. A tear left her eye, not broken, but whole. Charlotte kissed her, slowly, deeply, not like the first kiss, not hesitant, not afraid, but steady, certain, present. A promise sealed not by passion but by peace. When they pulled away, Charlotte slipped the ring onto her own finger, not because Emma couldn't do it, but because she wanted to. "It's not about keeping," Charlotte whispered. "It's about staying." Emma nodded, a smile forming, small, sincere, new. "And I am not afraid of staying anymore." They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The city below kept moving, unaware of what had happened. Not a headline, not a scandal, not a negotiation, but something quieter and far more important. Truth. Weeks later, when they finally walked into a room full of people, friends, not critics, laughter, not judgment, warmth, not scrutiny, they weren't performing. They weren't announcing. They weren't making a statement. They were just living. Emma stood with her hand gently over Charlotte's, not gripping, not holding, but resting there, as though she had finally learned that love wasn't possession but presence. There was no spotlight, no stage, no dramatic vows. Just Emma speaking softly once to the people who mattered, while looking only at Charlotte. "This is not the beginning of something perfect," she said, "but it is the beginning of something true." And Charlotte, smiling in that soft way she did when she felt completely seen, whispered, "And that's all that love ever needed to be." They didn't become a headline. They became a story worth remembering, not because it was flawless, but because it was theirs. And because at the end of everything, Emma had not married for the company, or for the world, or even for safety. She had married for love, and that had changed everything. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.